animal science. We're going to talk about ruminant nutrition today, specifically the digestive tract and feedstuffs that ruminants eat. I'm Maggie.
I'm Emily.
I'm Dee.
Okay, so basically, as far as prior knowledge goes, all you really need to know is about the gastrointestinal tract, and we're going to dive deeper into the parts of the GI tract, more specifically about the ruminants.
And at the end, we're going to have a little quiz game to make sure that you guys remember what you've learned. And at the meeting, we're going to have a couple discussion questions. Here are our standards that we need to cover.
Okay, so the first part of the lesson is about the GI tract of ruminants. There are three main types of ruminants that most people know about. There's cows, goats, and sheep. We're going to talk about cows today. So the GI tract runs from the mouth to the rectum. There's a diagram of a GI tract of a cow, and then here's everything in the GI tract of a cow. So we're going to start off with the mouth. The mouth has two purposes. The first one is for chewing. Animals chew to increase surface area, to break down foods, and then they produce saliva in their mouths to begin to break down those starches. The next part of the GI tract is the esophagus. There are two things that go with the esophagus. Its basic function is peristalsis, which is swallowing and regurgitation. This picture right here is an x-ray of the esophagus of a calf. So it just basically connects the mouth to the stomach. Fun fact, cows do not have four stomachs. It's a common misconception. They only have one, but it's split up into four compartments. The first compartment of the stomach is the reticulum, the second is the rumen, the third is the omasum, and the fourth is the abomasum. The average pH of a cow's stomach ranges from part to part, gradually getting more acidic, but it ranges from about a pH of 2.0 to 6.7. Cows store food in their stomach, but they also break down proteins with enzymes produced in each compartment. The first part is the reticulum. This is what a reticulum looks like. It has a honeycomb shape. It's the smallest compartment and holds about 5 to 6% of the total stomach contents at any given time. It collects, it collects any heavier coarse material that the cow eats, because cows are grazers and they are ruminants. They eat a lot at once, and so they don't really pay attention to what they eat. So if they eat wire or nails or anything, they get caught in the reticulum. And that is called hardware disease. If anything pierces the reticulum from hardware disease, it will kill the animal almost instantly. The second part is the rumen. The rumen is where anaerobic fermentation takes place, which is the first major breakdown of your food. It's lined with a million of papillae. They kind of look like shag carpet. These are all papillae. They're really small, like you can barely see them if you cut open a rumen. They're tongue-like shaped, and then so rumination is the act of eating all at once, and so they ruminate as a method of predator avoidance. So cows will eat all at once in a herd, and then when they feel safer, they will regurgitate to move back up, and that's what chewing your cud actually is.
Okay, and then urea. This is going to be, we're going to get to this a little bit later in the feedstuffs, but it's one of the feeds. It's a non-protein nitrogen source that you can give to ruminants, and you can only give this to ruminants because the microbes in the rumen are able to break this nitrogen down and turn it into amino acids.
The next part of the stomach is the esophageal groove. This is only used in calves, but it's a tube-like fold that bypasses the reticulum and the rumen. And the omasum, so it's used like a suckling contraction because the reticulum, the rumen, and the omasum cannot process milk, so it just takes it straight to the abomasum. The next part of the stomach is the omasum. It's a ball-shaped thing, and it's kind of like that. People don't really know what the omasum does, but theorists predict that it's used for nutrient absorption. The last part of the stomach is the abomasum. That's what the abomasum looks like. It's called the true stomach. It's similar to that of monogastrics, which are pigs are a good example of monogastrics. It holds about 8% of the total volume of the stomach at any given time, and it's lined with those folds. The next part of the GI tract is the liver, and the gallbladder comes right after that. The liver secretes bile for digestion, and then the gallbladder stores the liver. This is the liver, and this is the gallbladder. It's just kind of tucked behind it. It's not that big. And the pancreas shows up as soon as you enter the small intestine. The pancreas secretes enzymes to aid in lipids and proteins to help digest carbohydrates, and also secretes insulin to keep blood sugar low.
Okay, and then next is going to be the small intestine. You can see it comes right after the stomach, and this is going to be your primary site of nutrient absorption. It's lined with finger-like structures called villi. This is going to increase the surface area for more nutrient absorption. And there are 3 parts to the small intestine, starting with the duodenum, then going into the jejunum, and finally the ileum. And then right before the large intestine, you get the cecum. It's also known as the blind pouch because there's only one way in and one way out. And this is going to be your site of liquid and salt absorption. Okay, and then next is the large intestine, and then finally the rectum. The large intestine is going to be your site of microbial fermentation. This is where the volatile fatty acids are going to be fermented. It also does water absorption, and there are 2 parts to the large intestine with the large colon and the small colon. And the rectum, at the beginning of it, it will be forming the feces and then expelling them through the anus. And then these are going to be the feed types and the importance of balancing these feed types and the important ones for ruminants.
We have a video from a vet that owns a finishing operation, and he talks about the different types of feed stuff that he uses when he gets new cows in and when he is finished with them and is ready to sell them back to the market. Just to tell you what a finishing operation is, in case you don't know, it's not like a cow-calf operation where you breed and you raise and you sell steers and heifers. This is where you would buy steers and heifers and then raise them until they're ready to be sold to eat.
All right, well, the feedstuffs that we use are primarily silage, 1 of 3 types. Grain, we primarily feed corn, but there are times of the year where wheat or milo can be provided, and then we utilize dry distillers grain. When the cattle come in, they get started on what we refer to as a receiving diet or a starting diet. That diet has a higher proportion of roughage and a lower proportion of grain in it than does the finish ration. Now the thing that's unique about cattle is cattle are ruminants. So when we finish these animals, we're actually using a combination of roughage or fiber, if you will, along with starch that's in the grain. And those 2 combinations is what allows us to be as efficient as possible in terms of developing beef for human consumption. The dried distiller's grain we feed primarily as a supplemental protein source. When we look at the amount of grain that's in a diet, we're feeding grain primarily for energy. Whether it be corn, whether it be milo, whether it be wheat, we're primarily feeding that for energy. The starch that's contained in those grain is very energy dense as compared to what we can get out of roughages or forages. And so we utilize that because it allows for a more efficient growth production, and it allows for a different fat deposition in the animals that makes that meat more desirable to the human consumption side of the business. The silages, whether one wants to refer to them as roughage, as forage, or as fiber, that's primarily included into the diet to make sure that we maintain rumen health. And by rumen health, that's what we want to maintain in terms of rumen fermentation. Obviously, there's a great deal of musculature in that rumen. We want to stimulate that musculature to keep it rolling. We also, the inside of the rumen wall is covered with what are called papillae, and all this acid that's produced there has to be absorbed, and those papillae are very instrumental in nutrient absorption, primarily the volatile fatty acids. And so that roughage that's in there helps stimulate and maintain healthy papillae, which helps us have a more efficient nutrient absorption. And so it's all a balancing act that we look at. Now, silages, they also provide some energy, but it's not our primary source of energy. Just like grains, they'll provide some protein as well, but it's not our primary source of protein. The distiller's grain provides some energy, but it's not our primary source of energy. So they all have a multitude of nutrients that they bring to the overall nutritional package that's taken into account when you formulate that diet. However, you have to look at this as their primary responsibility of that individual ingredient that's put there. And then you have to run economics against that to make sure that you've got the proper ratios of those ingredients that are included there. Beyond that, obviously, you have to manage those techniques very well relative to the ratio of silage, roughage, forage, whatever terminology you want to use relative to the amount of grain that's there, because that acid production is a fine line between the animals being on target and growing very well, or if those animals get too much acid, they can get into some digestive upset issues, and we want to manage that across. And we do that through diet formulation. We also do it through feed management, which we already talked about. We want these cattle cleaned up in the morning. And then we can also handle that with making sure that they don't get over aggressive. So we want them cleaned up, but we want to make sure they have adequate feed to be content from that perspective.
So let's move on to some of our food stuff. So our first one, and we have some samples here. Our first one, you guys have probably seen before or eaten. This is hominy. It is made from maize, either white or yellow, which is corn. This process, you mix with an alkali, either lime or lye. It removes the hull, removes the germ, and puffs it to about 2 times its size. This can be combined with, with water. If you grind it, combine it with water, this is what tortillas are made from. This has a good source of niacin, B3, which is absorbed by the digestive system. The deficiency of niacin causes pellagra, which results in appetite loss, weakness, and death.
Okay, flaxseed is going to be a great source for omega-3 fatty acids. They're going to be rich in thiamine, magnesium, potassium, and phosphorus, and these are all pretty important minerals and vitamins in the diet. Without thiamine, you can get polioencephalomalacia, which is stargazing or head pressing. Stargazing is basically the animal just looking up at the ceiling all the time. And then head pressing is just as it sounds, they're pressing their head against the wall because their head hurts. A deficiency in magnesium. This can come from low magnesium levels in those fresh green spring pastures, and it can cause grass tetany, which is stiffness of the muscles. Potassium is just an electrolyte. And then phosphorus, if you get a deficiency in phosphorus, it can lead to rickets, which is a bone deformity, and pica, which would be abnormal appetite and wood chewing.
So our next food is blood meal. You guys probably have never eaten this. It's a dry powder made from blood. It's very high in protein and it has high amounts of nitrogen. Sometimes it's mixed in with molasses. There is a concern for mad cow disease with this because if you feed bovine blood meal to a cow, that's a big no-no, and that will cause your mad cow disease. That's why people will often feed porcine blood meal, which is from pigs, or you can do an alternative of butter meal or alfalfa meal.
Next is corn gluten meal. This is ground corn, and it's protein rich and a byproduct of maize starch.
Our next one are alfalfa cubes. So alfalfa, these are just the alfalfa that you see, long stem forage, pressed into cube shapes. So 1 pound of cubes is equal to 1 pound of hay.
And then trace mineralized salt block. Of all the things that you could be feeding to your animals, you want to make sure that you are feeding some form of a mineral salt block. It's extremely needed in the diet. 100 cows can go through 55 pounds in a week. And there's different types of minerals within different types of salt blocks. And those mineral needs are going to vary by region.
And then our last one is urea. This one is a nitrogenous compound, and Emily had mentioned earlier the use of it in the rumen. It's also a very cheap source of nitrogen. One of the interesting things about urea is it ranges from being in plastics to explosives to cosmetics. So for our quiz, I'm going to have all of you guys pull out your phones and go to a website for me. It is called quizshow.io.
No, it's quiz.sh.
Oh, sorry, quiz.sh. Hopefully it works. So basically it's just going to be, it's kind of like Kahoot, it's just a little bit different.
It's a little more competitive.
Yeah. So there are two different questions that you're gonna have, two different types of questions you're gonna have. Yes?
What was it?
Quiz.sh.
Yeah. But anyway, so hopefully this will work. Here.
So there's two types of questions. There's going to be a fill in the blank question.
Oh,
The
that's
thing
so
is
much better.
that only one person can get the question right at all. And there's 10 questions, so it's super competitive. So for the fill in the blank one, when the right answer pops up on the screen, you're going to hit the buzzer. And then for the multiple choice one, you're going to have to hit the buzzer before you're allowed to answer. You can have negative points, but like I said, only one person can get the question right out of the entire class.
And when there is the multiple choice, you have to hit the buzzer before you answer the question.
Wait, okay, I'm sorry. I lost you there.
It's like
I'm gonna
Jeopardy.
buzz and
There are two types of
It's like Jeopardy.
multiple choice
It's just
questions.
Jeopardy.
You have to hit the buzzer before you can select the answer.
You press the button first and then you get the answer.
Fill in the blank, you just hit the buzzer to answer.
It's like you see the question, and if you know, you hit the buzzer. And if you're the first one that hits the buzzer, you can.
Okay.
You'll see when they pop up on the screen. It'll make more sense.
So,
Everybody in?
has everyone gotten in who wants to get in?
He is not in yet.
Okay.
Not in yet?
Right.
Every answer is gonna
Do you need help?
four.
Is it passage?
You know what it says?
What is that actually? Hey.
Byproduct.
Alright, that's pretty fast.
What's happening? Wait, is the buzzer? Where's the rest of the card? Oh.
The colors are for the multiple
Are you
choice.
ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
1,000.
What is happening?
Oh, you're
Like
kidding
negative
me.
3,000 now.
How did you do that?
You just hit
How did I
buzzer
get
until
it?
the right answer comes in.
Why is he screaming?
Who got that one?
It screams when you get the answer.
So you have to buzz in before you can answer.
I can't see.
Oh.
Now you have to answer.
Oh,
You
what?
have to hit the buzzer.
You have to hit the buzzer
Oh, that was
first
a
and then you can
question.
answer.
Oh, are you kidding me? I
Oh, I
got
thought
that
that
then.
was
So you have
I pressed it before anybody.
I can't read anything. I need glasses.
How you got that before you?
You're just. You had no idea what it is.
How did I was up there though.
More of a.
I just clicked it.
Yep.
Can I get
Did I get that right?
Anybody winning?
Like Mr.
I don't know.
that is pretty cool.
Only one person who gets the question.
3/4 of the test.
No.
Seriously, I have no idea what it is.
I was up there though. Oh, I have negative 1,000 points. Yeah, me too.
I was 0.
Stop it. People are spamming the button.
See that?
There's no way you guys can read that.
I go.
Brandon, you're just clicking. Oh.
So much.
You just saw Brandon's name go miles and miles and miles.
Does mean I was right on the
Oh shit, I got that right.
Negative 4,000 points. I'm 5, so 0.
Great, no.
For the love of God, stop.
How did Craig do this?
Attaboy, Craig.
No, I hit fall first.
Oh shit,
I totally hit that first. I just don't even.
Thought I was
Like, do I just have to hold it or something?
You have negative 11,000 points.
I died for a second.
Woo, 0.
That was impossible. what the actual just happened.
Okay, so, let's just end with just a
Nick,
couple.
you're out.
Okay, let's just end with a couple quick questions. So, what do you think was the most interesting part of the digestive system, or what was your favorite food stuff that we passed on? Yes?
So when you said they don't actually have four stomachs, that kind of broke my heart because I grew up thinking cows have four stomachs.
They don't.
So that was the worst part of this.
Yes.
So this is actually like just a wider question, but when it was talking about the suckling thing, is that like a mechanical device, or is that something that they grow out of? Because I didn't think that was very clear.
So
Like, can you
they will
specify
still
that?
have the esophageal group for the rest of their
Okay.
life, but the suckling motion of the throat will send it directly to the group
Oh, okay.
rather than to the reticulum.
So the different muscle spasms of them
Yeah.
drinking. Okay.
I thought blood meal was gross.
Okay.
I mean, you don't have to eat it, thankfully.
Alright, so I may have misunderstood. I think it was you who was talking about it, but it was like so it was a part of the stomach that I think was the rumen, maybe?
The rumen?
Rumen, yeah, and then like you can give something directly to that, but nothing else. Like there was something that you said.
No,
Sac pouch.
so the cecum.
No, well, yeah, okay. No, I think it was the rumen that you said like you can give that part something because it absorbs it in a certain way, but you can't give another part of the stomach something.
Oh, the urea? That's
Yeah.
gonna be it's a feed that you can give to it. It will go through the entire stomach.
Oh, okay, because that's what I was wondering. I was like, how do you just get it to that one part and not the whole
Yeah,
stomach?
you just can't give it to any other animal besides the rumen.
Oh, yeah, that's what it was, rumen.
Yeah.
Okay, I see. So
Because
that's a
the
type of
villi
animal.
Are the
Yeah.
only thing that can break it down,
Yeah.
and ruminants are the only animals that have papillae.
Okay.
So with like the mad cow disease, how prevalent is chronic wasting disease among cows? Because I know that that's kind of a concern now.
I don't have a stat for that.
Okay. I mean, is that a pretty big concern when looking at, or like with feeding and or keeping them safe, or?
So yes, if you have any misbalance in feed that's drastic enough, then that becomes a really big concern. But most big producers don't have that. Also, grazing operations are bigger than feedlots, and so when you graze, you have a less chance of throwing the balance off.
Any other questions?
All right.